The morning my father's will was read, the sky turned the color of old pewter, and the world felt colder by a few quiet degrees. I thought grief would be the hardest part, but grief is a slow ache. Humiliation is a blade. When the envelope slid toward me across the mahogany table and Vivian's pearls flashed like small moons as she smiled, something in me understood that the ticket tucked inside wasn't exile. It was a door. I didn't know where it led. I only knew I couldn't stay where I was. I had spent years learning the choreography of silence in that house, how to move through gilded rooms without touching anything that mattered, how to earn approval that never came. Vivian, immaculate in black silk and compassion that glittered like glass, leaned close enough for her perfume to replace the air. "An envelope," she murmured as the lawyer's voice trembled. "How symbolic." Her son Ryan let a half-laugh slip, and I saw the future they were already fitting over themselves like a new coat, the company, the mansion, the yacht with its smug name. I heard my own voice before I felt my throat move, a small thread of sound that said, "There must be some mistake. I'm his daughter." And the lawyer didn't even look up as he read, "Miss Emily Carter will receive an envelope prepared by the deceased." When the red wax seal cracked under my thumb and the paper breathed open to reveal a single one-way plane ticket to London, Vivian's lips sharpened into a smile that could cut fabric. "London's lovely this time of year," she purred, and the room filled with laughter dressed as sympathy, while the chandelier hummed above us like an indifferent sun. I carried the envelope out into air that stung. The city moved as if none of this mattered, horns and heels and steam rising from vents like tired prayers. It should have felt like a dismissal. Instead, it pulsed like a message. I went back to the mansion because I needed a final look at the cage that taught me to be small. From the doorway, I heard Vivian's voice pour sugar over poison. "Ryan, darling, make sure the decorators arrive by Friday. I want the study turned into your new office." And when she saw me, she barely tilted her head. "Emily, you should start packing, unless you'd rather walk. It might save us the gas money." The staircase threw her laughter back at me as I climbed. In my room, a faint ring of dust showed where a photograph of my father used to sit. Once, he'd been easy with his smile and young enough to believe that love could outrun its own shadow. Mr. Harris, the butler who knew every secret the house tried to swallow, appeared in the doorway with hands folded like a benediction. "Your father was complicated," he said gently, "but he wasn't cruel. If he left you that ticket, there's a reason." "A reason to humiliate me?" I asked, and he shook his head. "Perhaps to lead you somewhere he couldn't." That night, the rain ticked across the windows like small, patient fingers. Something tugged me toward my father's study, the only room Vivian never conquered. Dust and leather threaded the air. Drawer by drawer, I searched for a breadcrumb and finally found a small locked box that surrendered to a firm hand. Inside lay a single faded photograph, a young woman by a river, her smile caught between relief and promise. No name, no date, only 4 handwritten words on the back in my father's careful script. For her. One day. I turned the photo over and felt a chill settle into purpose. I packed the picture beside the ticket. Dawn made the chandeliers look tired. Outside, the driver lifted my suitcase while the wind pinched color into my cheeks. Vivian stepped onto the porch in silk and satisfaction, coffee steaming in her hand. "Bon voyage, sweetheart," she said with a brightness that wanted to bruise. "Maybe you'll find yourself over there." I met her eyes and felt something unclench. "Maybe I will," I answered, and the car door finished the sentence for me. The plane chased winter light across the Atlantic while I pressed my forehead to the window and let clouds erase the last of what I owed that house. London came up through fog and metal and the damp perfume of rain. I held the envelope like a compass, in my father's handwriting, Harrington Square, number 14. The taxi rattled through streets that looked like centuries wrapped in brick, and when the car stopped before a gray townhouse with a black door that had learned patience, I stood on the step with my past in my pocket and rang the bell. The butler who opened the door wore duty like a second skin and recognition like a shadow. "Mr. Carter," he repeated softly when I spoke my father's name. "It has been a very long time." Inside smelled of sandalwood and old vows. Portraits watched with the kind of eyes that know where all the bones are buried. I waited in a hall where a woman in a crimson gown held her own secrets in oil and gold, and then footsteps, heels like metronomes, cut the quiet in two. She appeared tall, precise. Silver hair swept back as if refusing to bend to time, pearls burning with their own small constellations. She stopped as if the air had turned to glass and whispered, "Emily, my God, you have his eyes." I felt my name tilt. "Do I know you?" I asked, but she was shaking now, the way a person shakes when a story loosens in their throat after years of being trapped there. "Not yet," she said, and then 4 words rearranged the ground beneath my feet. "I am your mother." For a heartbeat, I thought she was joking. Some cruel trick from the universe to finish what Vivian started. But the look in her eyes wasn't performance. It was recognition so raw it hurt to see. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and grief. "That's not possible," I whispered. "My mother died when I was 2. Her expression faltered like glass under heat. "That's what your father told you, isn't it?" Her voice trembled but never broke. "Emily, my name is Margaret Harrington. I never died. Your father took you from me." The words crashed through me like a tide. The butler disappeared down the hall, leaving only the sound of a clock ticking softly, counting the seconds it took for my world to fall apart. "You're lying," I said, stepping back as my pulse roared in my ears. "Why would he do that?" Margaret reached for the silver locket around her neck, fingers trembling. She opened it and held it out. Inside was a photograph, a baby in a white blanket, and beside her, a younger version of this same woman, radiant, alive. The same small birthmark under the baby's left eye that I had spent my teenage years covering with makeup. "You were 6 months old when he took you," she said softly. "He was afraid. My family didn't approve. I was born into this." Her hand swept across the opulent hall. "And he came from nothing. When they refused to accept him, he left. He took you with him." I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. "Why didn't you find me? You're rich. You have power. You could have done something." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "I searched for years. He changed his name. Yours too. There was nothing left to trace. By the time I found the smallest thread, it was already too late. You were gone." I shook my head, anger and confusion warring inside me. My father, the man I had tried to make proud, who taught me to build walls and call them strength, had stolen my mother's life and mine in one breath. Margaret stepped closer, cautious, like approaching a wild thing. "He wasn't evil, Emily," she said quietly. "He was desperate. He thought he was protecting you." I wanted to laugh, but it came out as something else, something brittle. Protecting me from what? From the truth. My throat burned. She reached out, stopping just short of my shoulder. From a world that made him feel small. The words hung between us, heavy with everything we'd both lost. Then she pulled an envelope from her coat. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting unmistakable. "He sent this to me years ago," she said. "I never opened it until now." She unfolded the letter with reverence, her hands shaking. I watched as her eyes scanned the page, as her breath caught mid-line. It says, "Margaret, I can't keep hiding." She deserves to know who you are. One day she'll find the ticket and follow it home." She looked up at me, tears shining like small stars. "He wanted you to find me." My knees went weak. For years, I'd hated him for choosing them over me, for leaving me nothing but silence. Now I realized the ticket wasn't punishment. It was a map. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Margaret took a slow step forward, and this time, I didn't move away. She rested a trembling hand on my cheek, her touch hesitant but warm. "You've suffered enough," she whispered, "but you're home now, Emily. You're finally home." That night, sleep refused to come. I wandered the corridors of Harrington House like a ghost, tracing my fingers along carved railings and framed portraits, each one whispering that I belonged to a history I'd never known. At dawn, I found Margaret sitting in the sunroom, her face lit by the gray London light. She didn't turn when I entered, just said softly, "You didn't have to stay." "I couldn't leave," I murmured. "Not until I know everything." She nodded slowly, her reflection pale in the window. "Then you deserve the truth." Her voice grew steady as she spoke. "Your father and I met 32 years ago. He was a young architect working on one of my family's estates. Brilliant, ambitious, proud. He wanted to build a world that was his own. I loved that about him. My family didn't." She smiled faintly, then sighed. "When I became pregnant, they tried to send me away. He promised to protect me, to protect you. And for a while, he did." She looked down at her hands, perfectly composed, yet trembling. "But when money ran short, so did our happiness. He couldn't stand being looked down on. One night, I woke up and both of you were gone." My heart cracked open at her words. "He kidnapped me," I whispered, and she nodded, tears slipping silently. "He wrote once, said he couldn't raise you in a world that hated him. Then he vanished. I searched across continents. By the time I found traces of him, he was Richard Carter. You were already his in every way that mattered." I felt the room tilt again, the same way it had when she first said my name. "The man I defended my whole life," I said hoarsely. "The man I tried to impress, he built everything on a lie." Margaret's voice softened to a whisper. "He lied to protect his pride. But love isn't pride, Emily, it's truth." She reached for me then, not demanding, not forcing, and after a moment I let her. The embrace was awkward, trembling, and real. For the first time in years, I cried without hiding. She held me like she'd been waiting 3 decades to remember how. The morning light poured through the tall windows like a slow confession. I woke to the faint scent of lavender and the muffled sound of the city outside. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the memories returned. Margaret's trembling voice, the letter in my father's handwriting, the truth that had rewritten my entire life overnight. I found her already awake in the dining room, dressed in soft gray, her posture perfectly still as she stirred her tea. She looked up when I entered, her smile faint but warm. "You slept a little," she said, half question, half statement. I nodded, though neither of us believed it. We spent the morning in that vast, quiet house, walking through rooms that smelled of history and grief. Every photograph I passed made me ache. I was in none of them, yet I felt them all. Margaret showed me a velvet box she had kept locked for years. Inside were faded newspaper clippings, private investigator notes, and pictures of me as a toddler, proof of a love that refused to die. "Every birthday," she said softly, "I lit a candle for you. I told myself you'd find your way home." Her voice cracked at the last word, and something inside me finally gave way. I crossed the space between us and held her. It was strange, holding a stranger who felt like home. We sat like that for a long time. When we finally spoke again, my voice was quiet. I spent so many years thinking I wasn't enough, I said. That's what Vivian made sure I believed. Margaret's jaw tightened. She'll never hurt you again. But I wasn't so sure. Pain like that doesn't just vanish. It lingers, reshaping everything it touches. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. Vivian Carter. I almost dropped it. The message was short. Emily, please, we need to talk. It's urgent. My stomach nodded. For a while, I just stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or scream. After everything she'd done, what could she possibly want from me now? I ignored it. 1 day passed, then another. On the third night, my phone lit up again. Not a message this time, but a video call. Against my better judgment, I answered. Vivian's face filled the screen, but the woman I saw wasn't the one who had stood triumphant in pearls and silk. Her eyes were red, her makeup gone, her voice raw. Emily, she said barely above a whisper, please don't hang up. I said nothing. She swallowed hard. Everything's gone, the company, the house, the yacht, all of it. The investors pulled out. We're ruined. I felt a strange stillness inside me. No satisfaction, no pity, just quiet emptiness. Ryan's drinking, she continued, voice shaking. He's lost. I don't know what to do. You have to help us. That woman, Margaret. She's your mother, isn't she? You have money now, influence. Please talk to her. You're our family, too. Something sharp and cold bloomed in my chest. Family? I said, my voice low. You stole that word from me years ago. You laughed when they threw me out. You called me worthless. She looked down, shame hollowing her face. I know, she whispered, and I hate myself for it. But please, we have nothing. In the background, I heard Ryan's voice, louder, slurred. Why are you begging her, Mom? She's nothing. She's the reason Dad cut us off. That did it. Tell him, I said evenly, that Dad didn't cut you off. He just stopped protecting the lie you built your life on. Before she could respond, I ended the call. I stood there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, my phone still in my hand. Margaret found me like that, still trembling in the quiet. Was it her? She asked. I nodded. They've lost everything. She wants me to help. Margaret studied me carefully, her voice calm. And what do you want, Emily? I didn't have an answer at first. The truth was tangled inside me, full of noise and ache. Finally, I said, I want to see them one last time. Not for them. For me. She nodded slowly. Then we go together. You won't face them alone. 2 days later, we were on a plane bound for New York. As we flew above the clouds, I watched the horizon turn gold and thought about how small the world looked from up here. Even pain looked smaller when you rose above it. When the city appeared below us, cold and glittering, it felt like looking down on the ghost of my past. The Carter mansion waited at the end of a long avenue, stripped of its former glory. The iron gates hung crooked, the gardens overgrown, the windows dark. I stepped out of the car, the winter wind biting my cheeks. You don't have to do this, Margaret said quietly. I glanced at the house, at the cracked crest above the door that once gleamed like a crown. I do, I whispered. It started here. It should end here. The gates creaked open as if remembering me. The mansion that once towered like a monument to my father's pride now sagged under the weight of its silence. The driveway, once polished and gleaming, was cracked with weeds breaking through the stone. The air smelled faintly of dust and stale perfume, as if the house itself was mourning the people who had hollowed it out. Margaret stood a step behind me, her cream coat bright against the gray. I could feel her steady presence even without turning. When I finally lifted my hand to knock, the door opened before I touched it. Vivian stood there, or rather, what was left of her. The silk and confidence were gone. Her hair was limp, her skin pale, her robe replaced by an old sweater. The sight didn't bring joy, it brought quiet recognition. "Emily," she breathed, a forced smile twitching at the corners of her mouth. "You came." I met her gaze evenly. "You asked me to." Her eyes darted past me and froze when she saw Margaret. For a moment, the air between them felt electric, two lives finally colliding after decades of stolen years. Vivian tried to straighten, her voice trembling but polite. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, as if the name itself could grant her dignity. "Thank you for bringing Emily. I'm sure this is difficult for everyone." Margaret's reply was soft but merciless. "Difficult?" she repeated, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You stole my child's peace for 30 years. Difficult is the least of what this should be." Vivian's composure cracked. "I didn't steal anything," she said quickly. "Your husband did. I only benefited." Margaret's expression didn't change. "You knew," she said. "You knew who she was." Vivian's silence was answer enough. I stepped forward, my voice quiet but sharp. "You built your life on that lie." From the staircase behind her, Ryan's voice cut through the air. "Oh, great," he said, his tone dripping with bitterness. "The prodigal daughter's back. Here to gloat?" He stumbled down the steps, unshaven, his shirt half-buttoned, eyes bloodshot. The arrogance that once coated him now curdled into resentment. "I'm here because your mother begged me," I said. "Not to gloat, to finish this." Ryan let out a dry laugh. "Finish what? You think because you found some rich mother in London, you're better than us?" Margaret stepped forward, her presence commanding even in silence. "Watch your tone, young man," she said coolly. He looked at her, defiance flickering, but he said nothing. Vivian sank into an armchair, her hands shaking. "Please," she whispered, "we have nothing left. The house will be gone by next week. If you could just—" Her voice broke. "If you could ask your mother to help us." Margaret's eyes didn't soften. "I already decided," she said. Vivian's head lifted, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "The Harrington Foundation will transfer a modest sum to your account," Margaret continued. "Enough to start over, but you will never contact Emily again, not ever." The words landed like stone. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed again. "You do that even after everything," she whispered. Margaret's reply was steady. "Not for you, for her." She looked at me, her eyes full of something fierce and protective. "So she can live without the weight of your name." Tears pooled in Vivian's eyes, streaking down the faint remains of her mascara. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice empty of pride. But Ryan wasn't finished. He stood rigid, fists clenched. "We don't need your charity," he spat. "We're Carters. We'll rise again." I met his glare calmly. "Then do it without me." The silence that followed was long and heavy. The grandfather clock ticked from somewhere in the hall, the same sound that once haunted endless dinners where I'd sat invisible beside them. Now it only marked an ending. Vivian's hands twisted in her lap, her voice small. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "I just wanted security. I thought if I had enough, I could control everything." I studied her for a moment and saw not a villain, but a woman built from fear and greed, undone by both. "You can't control love," I said quietly. "You can only earn it." Her sobs came in short, gasping sounds. I felt Margaret's hand touch my arm lightly. "It's time to go," she murmured. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a cleansing wave. The door groaned shut behind us, a sound like a chapter closing. The sky was gray again, the same color as the day it all began, but this time, it didn't feel like grief. It felt like release. Margaret slipped her arm through mine as we walked toward the car. "You did well," she said softly. "It doesn't feel like victory." I murmured. "It's not meant to," she replied. "It's freedom." And as the mansion disappeared behind us, shrinking into shadow, I realized she was right. For the first time, the past wasn't chasing me anymore. It was fading quietly into something I could finally let go of. The drive back to the city was silent, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. The car moved through the gray afternoon, the trees blurring into streaks of bare branches against the glass. I watched them pass, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. The mansion that had defined my childhood, the people who had carved scars into my heart, it was all behind me now, gone, like smoke after a storm. Margaret sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze on the road ahead. After a long while, she said quietly, "You closed the door, Emily. That takes more courage than most people ever find." I turned to her, my throat tight. "I just wish my father could see me now." She smiled faintly. "He does," she whispered, "in ways you can't imagine." The next morning, we visited his grave. The cemetery was cold and still, the marble headstones glistening with dew under a pale sun. I knelt beside his, tracing my fingers over the carved letters. Richard Carter. The name I had once fought to honor now felt distant, almost foreign. I placed a small bouquet of white lilies at its base. They'd been his favorite, Margaret told me softly. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Then the words came, small but sure. "You lied to me," I whispered, "but you also led me here. Maybe this was your way of making things right." Margaret stood behind me in silence, the wind lifting the hem of her coat, the sound of distant church bells echoing faintly across the hills. Together we watched the sunlight break through the clouds, spilling warmth over the stone. It didn't feel like forgiveness, not yet, but it felt close. When we returned to London, Harrington House no longer felt like a stranger's world. It was becoming something else, something that finally felt like home. Margaret and I fell into an easy rhythm. We worked together at the Harrington Foundation, transforming the wealth that had once divided my parents into something that could heal others. It was poetic in its own quiet way, using the legacy that built walls to build bridges instead. Every morning, she'd bring tea to my office and we'd talk about plans for the next project, about helping families start over, about second chances. Each day, I saw more of her in myself, the same resolve, the same instinct to protect. And each evening, I felt a piece of my old life drift further away. Weeks turned into months. One evening, I stood on the balcony overlooking the Thames, the city shimmering like liquid gold beneath a velvet sky. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the soft hum of traffic rose like a lullaby. Margaret joined me, 2 cups of tea in hand. "Thinking again?" she teased gently. I smiled. "Always." She handed me a cup and wrapped her shawl around my shoulders. "About what this time?" I stared out over the river, about how strange it feels to finally belong somewhere. For so long, I thought home was something you inherited, not something you found. She smiled, eyes glinting in the city light. "You've always belonged, Emily. You just had to find the right truth." I looked down at the tea, warming my palms. "That ticket felt like punishment," I said softly, "but it was the best thing he ever gave me." Margaret nodded, her voice tender. "Sometimes love looks like cruelty when it's trying to lead you somewhere better." I let her words settle between us as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of the river and the faint toll of a bell from Westminster. The past no longer felt like a chain. It was simply a story, one I'd finally finished reading. Later that night, I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside, folded carefully, was the plane ticket my father had left me. The paper had yellowed slightly, the edges soft from being held too often. I smoothed it out with my fingers and smiled. "Thank you," I whispered, "for setting me free." The words hung in the quiet room like a benediction. Outside, The city lights flickered in the distance, reflections dancing across the glass. Somewhere, a clock struck midnight, 12 clear notes marking the start of a new day, a new hour, a new life. I thought of Vivian and Ryan, somewhere far away, rebuilding what was left of their world. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't wish them anything. They were simply part of a chapter that no longer needed to be read. As I stood there watching London shimmer beneath me, I understood something simple and true. I hadn't lost a family. I had found one. Sometimes life breaks us apart only so we can return to ourselves whole. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what does home mean to you?